Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's London Java Community Roundtable. It's really exciting to see you guys all here, and we have a few special invited guests today who you should be able to see pinned on your screen alongside myself. If you can't, they are Kate, Teresa and Bruno, and they've very kindly agreed to be our invited guests for this roundtable. As I'm sure you know, roundtables are a great opportunity for us to just discuss different things, and this particular one is entitled What's Happening in Java? So hopefully the title kind of tells you what we're going to be talking about. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Abby and I work with Barry Cranford, who's the founder of the LJC. That is just one of the communities that is run by RecWorks. We are a tech recruitment company with a huge difference. From our perspective, recruitment really could be a force for good in the industry. That's what we believe, beyond just placing people in jobs. We have a particular focus on learning, mentoring and personal development, and that's why we run events like this and communities like the LJC. From our perspective, if some people want to teach or share their knowledge and others want to learn, we are more than happy to connect you through our communities and events. To date, we have run over 700 events now for engineers, developers, students, graduates, CTOs. We have run hackathons, lightning talks, conferences, all sorts. In January this year, we made our 4,000th introduction through our Meet a Mentor program, which we're really excited about, and we're looking forward to seeing where that's going to go next. As I've already said, we love to give opportunities for people to connect, and this event is part of that. If you want to know more about any of our other communities, please do get in touch with myself, Helen Lewis or Barry, and let us know, and we can take it from there. The recording of today's roundtable will be available on YouTube. I will put the link to the channel in the chat at the end, or you can ping me a message on LinkedIn and I'll be able to send it. My name is exactly as you see it on my screen. So without further ado, let's get into this roundtable about what's happening in Java. We've had quite a lot of questions submitted, so thank you for that. If you have any questions as we go through, do feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and then obviously at an appropriate moment you can unmute and ask yourself. Whatever works best for you, we are happy with that. So to start us off, the first question I'd like to ask, I'll ask the three of you, Kate, Bruno and Teresa, what have been the most interesting developments you've seen in Java in the last 6 months?
Shall I go first? So I think for me, this isn't necessarily directly in like the changes in the Java language, but one of the really interesting things that I've been seeing over the last 6 months is more and more people talking about using Java in spaces where perhaps other languages are being created or making progress. I think for me, the really interesting thing is seeing how relevant Java still is, and projects like Operator SDK that are creating operators written in Java rather than written in languages like Go. I think that really shows that a lot of the new developments that are going into Java are being used really well, but also that there's lots of interesting projects and frameworks that are building on top of those as well, and making it a really interesting space, and meaning that actually, no matter what you're building, often there's a conversation to be had of actually, does Java fit really well in this space?
Excellent. Any other thoughts from you, Bruno or Teresa? Anything that's an interesting development in the last 6 months that you've seen?
What I can add is, besides all of the usual advancements in OpenJDK and new features in the Java language, new APIs, I mean, release of Java 18 and what's coming next in 19 and so forth. Those are things that we can discuss here. But one interesting thing that I particularly like that is not related to the roadmap of OpenJDK is regarding the usage of Java inside Kubernetes, with more and more research going into this space, and more best practices being documented, and companies and engineers finding more about the nuances of the JVM, and how it behaves in constrained environments like containers for Kubernetes with limited CPU, limited memory. I think this space is, to me, the most interesting one, where lots of people have no idea how JVM behaves, and people are just realizing these things now, even though they have been going on since Kubernetes was born, and container support was included into the JVM. So that is something that I find interesting, and would love to answer questions around that topic.
Excellent. As I have said, everybody else in the meeting, please do feel free to chip into the conversation at any point. I can't see you all, but just raise your hand or put something in the chat if you want to contribute a comment or a thought. We're more than happy to have a discussion roundtable. That's what we're doing. So obviously, with the developments in Java and the things alongside that, have there been any surprises that anyone's noticed? So things that weren't as popular as expected, or things that were way more popular than we thought they were going to be when they were released? I'm putting you all on the spot, I know. Got to think about these things.
Well, I think for me, just having recently gotten back into conferences and getting to talk to more Java developers, just the fact that adoption of the later releases is getting quicker and easier. There was such a gap for that period of time when like 9 and 11 came out, and it didn't really feel like there was going to be a lot of progress there. But now I'm talking to more and more people that have finally been able to make that jump, and are familiar with and moving to 17 much more quickly. So I think that's really awesome.
I absolutely found found interesting that Java 11 has finally surpassed Java 8, according to the latest New Relic survey, which is actually not a survey. They actually reported the usage of all of their customers. I could go on a PhD style debate over developer surveys and how useful they are or they're not. But the New Relic report is quite interesting because it's actually a report over usage across all of their customers in production. And on their report, Java 11 surpassed Java 8 by like 5% or something, something like that. So more than Java 8 for sure. And then Java 17 came with very little. I think that shows customers are still deploying Java 11. The journey to 17 and so on is a long journey to most enterprise customers. But it's surprising, but at the same time hopeful that customers are finding their way into the latest versions of Java. And I think again, the whole container story makes it easy for customers to do that now, because now the Java runtime is shipped along with the application instead of managed as a software that it has to be installed and maintained across VMs. So the deployment model of Java applications now is quite different than from the year 2000s and 2010s. So I think, starting 2020, this whole containerization has allowed new versions of Java to be adopted more quickly, relatively speaking, to enterprise customers. But still shows the complexity of container environments and also other solutions that customers have to rely on before they can move to the new versions of Java. So I think it's interesting how this landscape is reshaping, and we'll see how that will reflect when Java 21 is released next year, which is the next LTS release, at least from Oracle, and how other vendors will react to that and how the customers will react to that. I think Java 21 will be a milestone for this new deployment model, where I believe there will be a lot of stability of the JVM inside containers, a lot of learnings, a lot of shared knowledge, and possibly even new tools that will make that deployment model even better and easier for customers. So something to stay looking forward to.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I definitely second what Therese and Bruno were saying about the adoption. Certainly in the open source projects that I've been involved with, we've seen it hasn't been a barrier to get new people contributing, raising the Java level. We've felt that we can kind of increase the level and start introducing some of the new features into the code, and that hasn't seemed to put people off. And the thing that I found the most interesting, I think, has been how much the introductions of these new features into Java and the kind of push to have more releases has actually promoted conversation. So I know both within the company that I work in and more broadly at conferences and things, I think there's so many interesting discussions happening about how to use these new features, how to write code with them in a way that's still readable and maintainable, but what's the kind of key use cases, where do they come in, what are the choices to make? And I think there's so many interesting discussions happening around like how you actually put these into practice.
Yeah, I think that the 6-month release cycle too enables us to have these preview incubation features as well, which really helps with that and helps anyone who's interested basically be able to give feedback and get more involved by trying some of those out.
Excellent. So obviously Bruno touched on this a few moments ago about moving over to Java 17 from Java 11. Like what do you need to know before you migrate from one to the other?
I think it's well, of course, the changes between the two releases is important to know. But even more important than that is to know not just there's of course why, right? Why should I move from 8 to 11 or from 11 to 17? And this is something I've been seeing some developers struggle with their leadership in their companies, like leaderships and managers and CTOs and whoever is in a position of authority over these considerably large software upgrades. They always question, like, it's working, why should we move to the latest version? And it is an interesting question. I mean, the developer has to answer that question. It works with Java 8, so why should you move to Java 11 or 17 for whatever reason? And developers have to structure that answer. They have to answer that question. Because there's a new API is not a good answer. oh, because I can now use this new language syntax. Well, that's not a good reason. It is a reason. I think it's a plus. But new language features and new APIs should not be the primary reason. I think developers should be more smart about answering that question to their companies, customers, and employers. I think the real focus should be what is the benefit for the company in general. In second place, what is the benefit for the development team? I mean, developer productivity is important, quality of the code, readability, all of that is important. But that is important for the developer. And if the developer can make a connection on how those improvements in developer productivity will lead to better code, better software for the employer or their customer, then great. But if they are not able to make that link, then it's very difficult to justify. So I think it's easier and better to help them justify this migration or this upgrade is to provide performance results that show how their systems will run faster with these latest versions. And if the developers are able to prove performance benefits, then they can actually more easily translate that into cost savings for their employer or their customers. And once they do that, then the customer will have a much easier justification to process and understand and say, yes, let's move to Java 11 or Java 17 because we're going to save 20% of cloud infrastructure, for example. And if the employer sees that, then the developers win. And then they get all that developer productivity as a bonus. But I think that is one of the challenges of these conversations. So doing benchmark exercises inside the company is critical to do that. And also challenging because you have like 300 enterprise systems in a large company. And you cannot do like benchmark for 300 of them. So you have to find a few that are critical, do exercise of them, and then report and say, hey, we can save 20 to 40%. I don't know. If the number is significant, then you win. But if it's not significant, like, oh, we only got 5% performance enhancement, then the leadership may say, yeah, 5% is not enough. We're going to have to spend like months migrating this thing. So yeah, we're okay. Thanks for trying that. And developers just have to accept that. So sometimes it is frustrating, but it's part of the job.
I've had a sort of a question and a comment put in the chat here for you guys as well. So how do you make the link that Java is worth the upgrade? I think you've touched on a few things there, Bruno, but also a comment that I'd just love to get your thoughts on. Cost savings as a business case seem to get worse over time. So you spend developer time, which gets more expensive, to save hardware costs, which then makes things cheaper. So what are your thoughts on that? Is there a balance that can be reached with when you're trying to say, well, we should move to this because there are all these different reasons, but to get to those reasons, you're spending more money in the initial. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, and I think the answer is as tricky as it gets. As a professional inside a company, do you suggest that your salary gets reduced? Nobody will do that. So what are you going to try to do to deliver some value for your employer or your customer? Well, you try to find those cost savings. And some developer architects will work to find new architectural models that allow the company to reduce costs. For example, through distributed systems or microservices or whatever new approach, if the system can scale down to 0, when the system is not being used, well, that is some sort of cost savings, right? Especially if the company is running in the cloud, because cloud is, you pay by the use. If you're not using, you're not being charged. So that's why people are trying this, in pursuit of the perfect architectural model where they can scale down to zero. And when it's like on-prem deployments, I think the goal of cost savings is not to reduce costs, because you already paid for the hardware, so you have to use that hardware anyways. But I think that the more the team is able to use less computing power to achieve the same or even more performance needs, there is more hardware available for new systems that a company will eventually have to write anyways. So it's about, you have a limited set of hardware on-prem, and your system is using this, but now you have to develop a new application. Now you have to buy more hardware for that. So what do? To save costs? You enhance the performance of your existing systems, so you free some resources for new systems, and that can translate into not having to buy new hardware. And that is easier to achieve than reduce costs with developers and human resources inside a company. So you do, as a developer, you do what you can to help your employer or your customer. Unless you can say, no, I'm going to be a farmer and I'll give you all my paycheck moving forward because I'm quitting my job. That's also an option. Not everybody will go for that route.
I think another thing to consider is just that keeping up incrementally is faster, like uses less developer time than, say, you're 10 versions behind and then you have to figure out how to upgrade. Like I've seen a lot of enterprise customers that were still stuck on Java 6 when Java 11 was coming out, and I'm assuming that they're probably still there, and having to pay a lot of money for their specific company to even be supported, basically. And I mean, obviously, if you're just a few versions behind, that's not as much of a concern, but as that gap grows bigger and bigger, it becomes harder and harder to catch up. So keeping up and keeping track of things like what's been deprecated for removal and thinking about that sort of going forward, even though it's not yet been removed, type of thing, I think is valuable for saving yourself that huge headache when the time comes that you actually need to upgrade or have a more pressing business reason, like security or a new feature that you really need to use.
Yeah, companies will always have some technical debt that has to be recovered eventually. Some teams prefer to just build and release and not care about technical debt, because sometimes they know the systems will have to be rewritten anyways, or requirements will change, or it's not like a ship once and let go. Some systems are like that. Most systems in enterprise companies, they will require some level of maintenance, but not much. And once there is like changes everything, just go and start from scratch, I guess. So yeah, developer time is something to be considered, as well as like how you save that. So for example, developer environments, like the amount of time that developers spend setting up their computers for, especially when you shift, I'm working on this project, now I'm going to work on that project. Now you have to waste at least 2 days just setting up your local development environment. And lots of companies are now focused on that. I mean, Microsoft is one example with GitHub Code Spaces on how you can have these developer environments more already structured for each project. So the developer has a much faster time to start working on that project. And that is developer time that is saved a lot based on the advancements of the project structure and the software that is in use. VS Code has support for that now. IntelliJ has support for that, remote environments and dev containers. And Docker Desktop has evolved significantly to allow and help with that. And those are all key components of the developer stack to help reduce that cost, whether financially or at least in productivity, improve productivity.
We've had a couple of comments again through the chat, just for anyone who hasn't seen. So there was a comment about for on-premise, developers typically don't run the servers, the IT department does. And IT may or may not have incentives to save costs, but typically developers don't have incentives to help their IT department. And I guess there's a bit of a tension, of a bit of balance to try and reach with that side of things as well, isn't there? An interesting balance to reach.
There's a word for that. It's culture, right? If the IT department is not talking to developers, there's a culture problem in that company. And typically, most companies do have culture problems like that. It's challenge number one. Challenge number two, how you move to the latest version of Java. So let's focus on challenge number one, how you got developers to talk to IT folks first. And I remember in 2010, I was working on for a bank that I had this exact situation. We were on the development team. We just wrote these Java EE applications, and the IT department was the one deploying to application servers in production. And we had zero control over that, except when we could have control, at least in the code, and do some things that were questionable, to say the least, just to get around constraints. But I think if the development team really wants to, like going back to the objectives, right? Why move into a newer version of Java? Why move into a newer version of a framework or a library that you're consuming? For the developers about that thing, like I don't want to use Java 6 anymore. I want to use Java 17 because I want to use the latest features so I can develop my career as a developer. I want to use the latest so I can learn while doing my job. That is what all developers want. They want to get paid to learn new stuff so they can have an opportunity for the next job, right? They don't want to be stuck on this job doing this old legacy thing forever. So there's always this pursuit of the latest and greatest. So we are always learning new things. And it's a vicious cycle, I think, on most developers, where they would feel stuck if they're only working with old technology. So it's a trade-off, and that trade-off is, hey, company, I want to do this thing. I want to use the latest and the greatest, and the company will be like, well, give us something. What do we get from that? So it's a trade that developers have to do. And that trade for the company comes into cost savings. If you are able to convince what are the potential cost savings of these upgrades and how the company benefits from that, then you get the second benefit, which is what you are actually pursuing as a developer, as a professional. So it's a trade at the end of the day.
I think that
in my opinion.
Yeah. That speaks to Constantine's point as well in the chat about migration, helping with recruitment and developers wanting to work on the latest technology. Certainly.
Yeah, he said it's good appealing for employability.
Mm-hmm.
as well. Kate, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting hearing all the different thoughts around the different elements you can consider. And I think there are two things that come to mind as people are talking for me. One is I've certainly seen working in the Kubernetes space that actually there's kind of there are incentives in terms of getting your footprint down and having applications that can start really fast and be spun up and spun down pretty quickly, but also aren't taking up too much space, in that then it does make it easier for you to have sort of development and staging environments. Even though obviously as much as possible we want to be able to do integration tests and things without having to run the whole system, naturally at some point you're going to have some sort of environment where you want to test everything together. And I don't know about other people, but I know for me, in the different teams I've been in, it's always been a constant thing of, you know, how do we get the space and the environments to run everything and do our testing? So that's something that's perhaps interesting. But I think also the kind of broader point perhaps that Bruno is kind of getting at is actually it's really easy as a developer to look at just the kind of language features and looking at how does this affect the way I write my Java code when new features come out, but there is so much else that's going in, whether it's bug fixes, whether it's security fixes, whether it's performance improvements. And actually, when you're looking at going to the next version, it's quite, if you look at sort of conference talks, you'll see mostly the ones where it says, this is your Java code now, and this is what it's going to look like next. But perhaps looking at the wider picture is a really good thing to do when you're discussing adopting the next version.
Brilliant. Does anybody else in the room have any questions? I'm very aware I'm hearing a lot of my voice.
There's another one in the chat about native Java. I think it's interesting. Yeah, so the question is about how do you see the adoption of basically native or static Java? Is it bleeding edge, early adopters, or early majority? Yeah, in my opinion, I would say probably bleeding edge. Because, I mean, while Quarkus is certainly getting some quite a bit of attention and people are starting to use it, I would say most users are still using it with a traditional JVM, because you have the option to use it with Graal or the JDK. And Graal is a great tool. However, in my experience, it does require at least a little bit of knowledge, I think, about how your code's being compiled, which, you know, is a little bit tricky and does require a more advanced user. But this sort of brings me into the topic of Project Layden, which has just recently been getting a little bit of talk on the OpenJDK mailing list. So if you're not familiar with Project Layden, it's all about how do we basically standardize static images as part of the Java language, and what's the best approach towards creating this kind of technology. And so there's quite a few research projects going on at the moment. There's CRAC projects and OpenJ9 Snapshot and Restore. Those are both talking more about, can we pause our Java runtime like partway through so we can skip that that startup aspect that's very expensive. But so we'll see where it goes with that. But ultimately they've basically decided that instead of having you switch, okay, I'm using OpenJDK and now I'm going to use, you know, something like static image and switch over, it's going to be more of an incremental type of process. And so introduce features slowly that can be used without too much needing to know about the compiler as much, and is it build time or is it runtime type of thing. So I'm very curious to see where that's going to go. It's just been getting some conversation in the last like 2 weeks. So those are my thoughts.
So something to look out for.
Yeah, something to look out for indeed.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested if people on the call are using things like Quarkus or Micronaut and things like that. Do post in the chat, so like, what kind of things are you using? Are you using them in production already, or just thinking about it? I know I've definitely been in more conversations recently where the question has come up, should we be doing this native or not? Is that something that we think will make a difference? And yeah, if anyone wants to contribute their experiences, then feel free to put in the chat or just unmute yourself and share. But yeah, it's definitely a conversation that's coming up a lot more than it had been in the past few years, I think.
Interesting. I'm loving hearing about how different things are moving forward, and just like you say, things are changing and there's more conversation around a certain topic now than there was a while ago, and I find it really interesting to see how everything kind of evolves in different stages, as it were, and in different speeds as well, which does lead very nicely onto another question. Well, we've had another question come up in the chat as well. So what do people use for the UI of their Java desktop apps? Do you use JavaFX, Swing, web technologies? Is there a preference? Does it make a difference? Yeah, what are the differences that make it either more user-friendly, not user-friendly, I guess?
So I've done Swing development in the past. I've done JavaFX development in the past, and unfortunately, to some degree, I had to write CSS and JavaScript as well to do web development in the past. Those are all choices. For the end user, it really like, give me the best sort of situation. So take it, for example, banking users, online banking. You wanna make a transfer, and what is the best way to do today? Actually, it's through your app on your phone, right? Not going to the banking website. Who goes to the banking website on their phones? Nobody. You use the app from your bank. But funny enough, on your PC or laptop, you go to the website, right? And that is interesting, because the application that you install on your phone is probably 50 megabytes or more of an Android or iPhone application of your banking, online banking software. But in your computer, which technically has more power than your phone, people go to the browser for everything. So I think the interesting thing is the discoverability of applications on your phone is through apps, but discoverability of applications from your computer is through the browser. And if you're in the browser, well, you just access the website that you're looking for. But your phone, when you want to look for something, you go to the app. Even if you go to your banking website first, you're gonna have this option. Oh, install our banking application on your iPhone or Android, and then you close the browser and you go to the app. But on a website on your computer, there's no such option. Download your Windows desktop application or Mac OS application and install that. Nobody has time to install software on a PC. It's okay to wait on your phone, but not on your PC. You don't want to wait for stuff on your PC, even though you probably have a better internet connection on your PC as well. So yeah, it's interesting. It's customer behavior. So I think user behavior or expectations. So I think either web or desktop can be used depending on that context. I think that is up to the developer to figure out. Between JavaFX and Swing, if you have to go the desktop way, the interesting thing about JavaFX is that there are solutions that allow you to write your application once and truly deploy anywhere. You can have a JavaFX application that renders through the browser, or you can have a JavaFX application that you can actually package into an Android application and ship it as an Android app or as an iOS app. You can also ship it to the Microsoft Store for Windows PC, or you can ship it to the App Store for Mac OS. And now you have a single application written in JavaFX that can run literally anywhere. So if the developers do have that option, and they do have the knowledge to write those JavaFX applications, and they have a need that matches the user behavior or expectation, then it's a great solution. One IDE that some people might know called IntelliJ something, they write in Swing. It's not purely Swing. It's JetBrains made a few changes in their stack, but it's basically Swing, and it works great, as some developers will see this thing called IntelliJ. So great technology that does deliver. And there is another project called Binger. I forgot it. Is it Picture? I think it's Binger. It's a time series. Yeah, Binger. Bin from binary, JR, Binger. It's a time series tool. Time series browser. Well, it says browser, but it's actually a desktop application to browse a time series of events. And it has a very nice visual and plots lots of charts of your data, and you can process that offline. And it's very well designed, and it's a Java desktop application. And I think it's JavaFX, I think. But either way, it really doesn't matter. For the end user, it doesn't matter. Give me the app. I just want to access my data and my stuff and do things with it. But truth is, desktop applications do behave better than web applications mimicking desktop applications. And we've seen this in the past with mobile applications trying to be like this cross-platform mobile applications for iOS and Android, where you write a web application and you actually ship a web application in a sort of like a container, not Linux container, but like Cordova, for example, technologies that wrap a web application and render through a web view on your phone. It feels like a mobile app, but it doesn't. And there are similar technologies now for desktop applications where you write a web application, but you ship as a desktop application and try to give that a experience, but those don't deliver well. So I'm a big advocate for, if you're going to write a desktop application, write a desktop application. And if you want it to be a cross-platform, well, use technologies to build desktop applications that are cross-platform. Don't try to write a web application that ships as a desktop application. Don't do that to your users.
I'm the person who asked that question. Bruno, everything you said was very interesting. Thank you. If other panel members have a view, I'd be interested to hear them too. But also, just people listening into the call, it'd be interesting to know how many people use JavaFX, how many people use Swing, or if other people have people might have other suggestions. So I'd encourage you to put something in the chat if you'd like to contribute to that. Thanks. I
want like Teresa Kate, feel free to answer a question. But I know you two. I assume you don't work with desktop applications or Java desktop applications. Is that right?
Yeah, I haven't done anything with Java desktop apps, I'm afraid. I've worked in teams where we've done web applications, where I've mostly worked on the back end, using things like React and JavaScript, but yeah, not Java desktop apps.
Yeah, most of my work has been on the JVM side, so pretty far away from user experience there.
So Alan, back to you. I would say, if you ask in this room if anybody does desktop applications with GTK or Qt, which are more like other technologies for building desktop applications, the answer would be like no one, right? Here, probably no one. In this London Java community, I don't think there will be anyone here doing Qt development today. But my point is, those technologies are kind of niche these days. At large, enterprise applications are web applications. They ship through the browser, even if only on the local network of these enterprise customers. So the deployment model and the user expectation these days in these enterprise customers is everything is accessible through the browser. Oh, you want to go into the payroll system, go to the intranet portal and access payroll. Oh, you want to do expenses or procurement. All of those things are web applications now. It's very specific use cases will actually demand desktop applications. You do find that in some specific industries like healthcare and finance, but we as end user and as consumers, we probably don't see those applications because these applications are developed to be used by the employees within those companies. And that's why they're not trending, they're not widespread, because they're very specific use cases. But they do exist. And the reason I say they do exist is because Qt has a huge ecosystem across North America and Europe and Asia. They have these large conferences that happen. I mean, before COVID, they were happening. These large conferences with lots of vendors. So I think the Qt ecosystem is a great example that proves the need for desktop technologies or technologies to write at the very least native GUI applications. And Java is an alternative to Qt. JavaFX is an alternative to Qt for sure. So if you do have a use case that requires a more desktop approach, JavaFX is certainly an alternative to those technologies. And Windows desktop applications or macOS native desktop applications, we see them all the time. But in the enterprise world, they are less common. But when there is a scenario, the scenarios are very advanced. Trading systems are done in desktop applications. Trading apps for fund managers and whatever fintech. We see those there. So it's all about who you ask the question. Like, oh, do you see desktop applications? Well, it depends who you're asking. You have to ask people who do work and develop for desktop needs. But the answer is yes. And there is a company in Europe called Gluon HQ, based in Belgium. At least their main office, I think, is Belgium. That developed JavaFX technology, and they are one of the main maintainers of the OpenJFX project. And they have customers, and their customers have to write these applications. So certainly there is a space for that.
Yeah. We're a GIS company, Geographic Information Systems, and the big enterprises you mentioned, they're customers of ours, many of them. And we offer a JavaFX solution, and we're bought into JavaFX. But the reason I asked the question was to try and find out more broadly how broadly it's used. So I was interested in hearing as many different viewpoints on this as possible.
Yep. And that's a great use case, by the way. I'm sure there's a reason you have a desktop app, no matter what technology, to do geographic data.
Indeed. I won't bore you with the details just now.
That sounds like a conversation you guys can carry on if you want to at another time. It sounds really interesting, though. Thank you, Alan, for asking and chipping in there. That's brilliant. So looking at the time, I would say probably one last question. How is Java evolving in comparison with other JVM languages, for example, such as Kotlin or Scala? What are the differences in the evolving of Java in relation to the other languages, other non-JVM languages?
So I haven't spent a lot of time looking at Kotlin and Scala in detail, but one of the interesting things that I've noted happening in the Kafka space, at least, is Kafka is Scala and Java, and the core of Kafka is written in Scala, but actually over time, it's becoming more and more Java-based and more of the additional pieces around the edges of Java. So at least my experience has been that it definitely feels like there's like a core group of people that are talking about Kotlin and Scala and the new features there at conferences, and there are teams that I'm seeing doing the conversion going from Java to one of those languages. But actually, I think the mass of people, as far as I can see, are still in the Java space. And certainly in Kafka, we've ended up, I think, with the majority of the code base being Java, even though the core didn't start that way, which is interesting.
Yeah, Scala has been in this space of like big data for quite a long time, and certainly it has its advantages for writing these applications that will process lots of data. But I think, yeah, as the Java language evolves, the need for these JVM languages becomes, I guess, less and less necessary. But at the same time, it's thanks to these other JVM languages that the Java language has evolved. So I think what will happen eventually is a new language will come up and new ideas will come up, and people will say, oh, this is the best JVM language ever created. And there will be some hype, there will be some discussions in war languages again, and some people will cry in the corner, and others will say, no, it's okay, and it will just happen. And I think that's the funny thing about software development. People are very creative, so it's good actually that the JVM allows development of these languages, of new languages, because innovation happens that way. So Scala and Kotlin have brought a lot into the Java ecosystem in general. Clojure is another great language that has some nice ideas that could potentially be incorporated as well into the Java language. I'm not a language expert. I just like to use language features. I'm not a language architect, but it's interesting. And the other thing I find interesting about the JVM with JVM languages is when you can actually write code with existing languages like Ruby and run all the JVM, your Ruby code in JavaScript, if you're really into that. I think it's all these options are great for the ecosystem. I did have a use case in the past where we needed to write some sort of like a financial math, and we implemented in JavaScript those mathematical algorithms, and we hosted as JavaScript in the database, and then we would use a Java library that would evaluate the JavaScript code to those calculations during runtime. It was a fun project. I would probably do that in a different way these days, but it did work back then. It did work, and it was easy to change those calculations whenever there was a new tax code or new regulation from the government. Oh, you have to calculate this thing this other way, and we would just go into the database and ship a new JavaScript algorithm. So it was fun. So yeah, it's good to have those languages.
Yeah, I think often the changes in Java are sort of inspired by other new languages and what they've done, because they can look at Java and say, what would we do differently if we start from scratch? But I definitely think over the last however many versions of Java, there's been so many improvements that have been made to kind of clean up the dependencies and things like that, that then makes it easier for Java to evolve and adopt some of these things going forward.
Yeah, I think that is one really cool part about Java, is that because of the way it's compiled down to bytecode, you do have all these different options, and the way we talk about expressing what we actually mean is different than the technology behind it. But I was going to say that some of the features that I've been really excited about in the last couple of releases are those around Project Amber and the records and sealed classes and pattern matching. That's really just making the way that we're able to express data using Java classes be just so much nicer to write and to read. So I would highly encourage everybody. That's totally not answering the question because this is about the Java language, but if you haven't seen those features, I would highly recommend it. And I mean, for me personally, that's a huge benefit of upgrading to Java 17 and 18, is just to have those new language features, because at least in my projects, they've made a pretty massive difference in some areas.
That's really good to hear. Thank you. Well, that is all we have time for today. So all that's left for me to say is, if you would like the recording of this session, I've just put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat, or just message me and remind me that you'd like today's roundtable and I'll get it sent to you when it's ready. That's absolutely fine too. So all that's left for me to do now is to thank Kate, Teresa and Bruno for joining us as our invited guests on today's roundtable, and thank you all, everybody else, for joining us as well and for participating either in the chat or vocally. It's been great to have you all, and I look forward to seeing you at our next London Java community event. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks for having me, Abby.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Great to have you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.